Hello, friends. I hope you're out wandering through nature, exploring the natural world around you. Do you enjoy writing about your wanderings? Nature journaling is an awesome, fun way to remember all the adventures you have taken and how you felt during those journeys. If you're looking for some beautiful journals to keep track of all your wanderings, I have several available on Amazon, including some guided journals for children. Start your journey in journaling by clicking on the link in the show notes. Keep exploring the nature around you and keep journaling all your wanderings. Hey friends, this is Paul, and of course this is the Nature Wanderer podcast, and today I want to talk about a once-in-a-lifetime event, at least that's what they're calling it. If you have been hiding under a rock recently, you may not know about the total solar eclipse that's coming up this Monday. It's actually Monday. It's going over, solar eclipses happen all the time, but they don't always go into the total phase and over a very highly populated area either. And that's what's happening on Monday is a total solar eclipse is passing right over the United States. And I am lucky enough, being in the northeastern U.S., I'm going to be right in the main path at my house of this eclipse. Now, there's a lot of events going on around me. Local state parks are having events. Towns are having events. Small villages are having events. There's events all over the place, but I've got a big yard. Not a lot of trees in my yard. It's open field, so I'm going to get a good viewing right from my yard, and I get to avoid the crowds. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a little while about something else I'm going to be doing during the eclipse, which is why I want to be kind of on my own property and away from other people, is I'm going to be listening to the eclipse. And I'll explain that in a little while, But before I start talking about all that, I wanted to kind of fill you in a little bit about eclipses. It's a big deal, and everyone's been hearing about it. It's been called a once-in-a-lifetime event, although I've been able to see a total solar eclipse in the past. When I was very young, I recall it, and it does happen. So some people do get to see them more than once in their lifetime, but it is a big event because it doesn't happen very often, at least not where you get to see a total eclipse. There are a lot of different types of eclipses, and that's what I want to start out by talking about the different types. Now, of course, there's solar eclipse, and you may have heard of lunar eclipses. I have seen several lunar eclipses in my lifetime, but there are different types of solar eclipses and different types of lunar eclipses. And let's talk about lunar first. Since we're not going to have one, I'll go briefly through lunar eclipses. Of course, there is a total lunar eclipse. And that is when the Earth's, what we call the umbra, or the central dark part of its shadow, that shadow covers all of the moon's surface. So you have the sun on one side of the Earth and the moon on the other side of the Earth. Now, if you're seeing this eclipse, you're on the side where it's nighttime and you see this full moon. But when it passes through the shadow of the Earth, that's when you get an eclipse. And if it passes just right in your location, then you get a total lunar eclipse, where the shadow of the Earth covers the entire thing. Then, of course, there's a partial lunar eclipse. That's when the moon is just obscured partly by the Earth's umbra. So essentially, the Earth is in the way of the sun's shadow, or it's causing a shadow, I should say. So the sun is on one side of the Earth, the moon's on the opposite side, and the Earth is passing in between, causing a shadow, but it's not lined up perfectly straight. So therefore, the Earth's shadow is just blocking the sunlight from part of the moon. So you'll see it kind of cross over this full moon, you'll see the shadow cross over just part of the moon. And then it comes back into full moon again, full light from the sun. That's why we can see the moon at nighttime, is because of the sun's shadow. Okay, or I should say the Earth's shadow, the sun's light shining on it. And if the Earth isn't blocking it at all, that's when we get a full moon. Like I said, there's so much more to explain, but we don't have a lot of time, and it's so much easier with models too. It's hard to explain it with words, but essentially you have the moon on one side of the Earth, sun on the other side. The shadow of the Earth on the moon is what's causing these eclipses. Now, there is one more type of lunar eclipse. It's called a penumbral. Okay, the penumbral lunar eclipse. And this happens when the moon travels through the faint penumbral portion of Earth's shadow. So it's actually on the outside. So the shadow is hitting the Earth, it's going around the Earth, and it hits the moon. So the light splits, and it causes the shadow. Now, the faint part on the edges of this shadow is what we call the penumbra. Now, the penumbra, when that starts casting a shadow on the moon, usually get a bright red section. So it's pretty neat to see a penumbral lunar eclipse. Okay, now we have a total solar eclipse coming up. Now, when you have a solar eclipse, what is happening is when the moon comes between the sun and the Earth. So before they were on opposite sides of the Earth, now you have the moon rotating around the Earth, and it suddenly comes right between the sun and the moon. Now, a lot of this has to do with distance too. How far away the moon is from the Earth. And you may be thinking it's always the same distance. Well, it's not. When the moon is rotating around the Earth, or I should say orbiting around the Earth, not rotating, it's rotating on its own axis, but as it's going around the Earth in an orbit, it's not a circular orbit. It's actually an oval-shaped orbit. So sometimes when we have what they call a supermoon, what that is, the moon looks extra big, and that's because it's closer to the Earth. It's in the orbit part where it's really close to the Earth. So you're getting a bigger moon, which can block the sun more. So this is what I mean about distance. If it's further away, it's not going to block the whole sun. And what you get with a total solar eclipse is when the moon is directly between the Earth and the sun. So the shadow of the moon coming from the sun, that shadow is actually passing along the Earth. And it goes rather quickly. It doesn't last very long, a total solar eclipse. Usually about the peak of it, when it's in what we call totality, where it's covered the entire sun and it gets darker, that only lasts about 3 minutes. The whole event can last hours, from the time it starts to cover the sun to the time when it's fully covered and then it starts to uncover again. That can last hours. Now, when this happens, usually that shadow during this time when it's passing over your area, that shadow is about 100 miles wide, approximately 100 miles wide. It can be very long too, because like I said, it's moving through the sky, everything's moving, rotating, it's orbiting, and what's happening is it's almost like following a path along the Earth, this shadow. So it's not going to last long. You're coming into daylight again pretty soon. Now, a partial solar eclipse is the next one I want to talk about. A partial solar eclipse happens when the moon only partially covers the disk of the sun. So it slowly comes in front of the sun, causing it to block part of the sun. And it usually doesn't cause much of a shadow on the Earth. If it's a large portion that's blocking, you may get some darkness. It may get a little bit of darkness, but it's not going to go totally dark. It's not going to be like nighttime. That is a partial solar eclipse. Now, the third one is an annular solar eclipse, which we just had not too long ago, just last year, I believe it was. We had an annular solar eclipse. That is when the new moon covers the sun's center, leaving the outside to form what we call the ring of fire, or it's also known as the annulus. So the annular solar eclipse, the moon does pass in front of the sun, but because of the distance away from the earth, it doesn't cover the entire sun. So you get a ring of light going around. So it looks like a total solar eclipse, except you get that ring of fire around the moon. And it looks really awesome when it happens. Look it up. There are YouTube videos showing these different types of eclipses, and that'll kind of help you out. Now, they do stick a fourth one in. I've seen in many sources what they call a hybrid solar eclipse. It's very rare. Doesn't happen very often. It's basically when an annular solar eclipse kind of turns into a total solar eclipse, or vice versa. And this happens along the path. So one area may see a total solar eclipse, and then another area who's watching the eclipse may see a annular solar eclipse. So it kind of changes by where you're located along its path. So those are the different types of eclipses. Now, I'm sure you've been listening to all the news stories, maybe reading newspapers. I mean, it is a big event here in the U.S., and especially if you're along the path. I mean, I've been hearing about this for a couple of years now in Western New York here. They've been planning for it for years, and they're expecting millions of people into Western New York to watch this because we're right in the path. Buffalo, New York, right on the path. I live half an hour south of Buffalo, 45 minutes south of Buffalo, and I am in the path. So it is, like I said, about a 100-mile path that this follows. Now, I don't want to bore you. You've probably heard a lot of information about it, but what you usually don't hear about is how the eclipse affects nature. And that's what I want to talk about in this podcast. How the solar, especially a total solar eclipse, affects nature and the animals around us. So how does an eclipse affect wild animals and even our pets? I mean, they're animals too. Well, you see, animals, especially wild animals, don't go by a digital clock. They don't have watches. They don't have cell phones to check all the time. So their time is basically by the light, by instinct, magnetic field maybe, but it's not a set time by looking over at the wall and seeing a clock and saying, oh, it's 8 o'clock, it's time for bed. No, what they're doing is once the sun starts going down, their biological clock starts to kick in, and it tells them, okay, well, it's time to get ready to go to sleep. I mean, it's dark out now, so I'm more vulnerable to nocturnal animals. I need to start getting into my den, hiding, getting away from... Well, this is how wildlife works. This is how our dogs work. They have an internal clock. I mean, my dogs, every night, they get an 8 o'clock snack, so they always know when 8 o'clock is. I don't know, maybe they can read the clock on the wall, but I still don't think that's what it is. If I'm a little bit late, if my wife and I are sitting on the couch watching a TV show and all of a sudden it's 8:15, my dog is just staring me down. Yeah, my older dog. He'll stare me down. He'll then start nudging me, or he'll walk over towards the closet door where we keep his snacks, and he lets us know. No alarm went off, but it's an internal clock, and wildlife is the same way. So when you have a disruption in that internal clock, like an eclipse, that can throw everything off for these animals. Now, in the wild, they have done some studies on how eclipses do affect wildlife, but there's been other studies on how eclipses affect animals in general. For instance, pet reactions. Different veterinarians have done studies during eclipses and found what their pets do. Maybe people have noticed, my pet's acting strange during an eclipse. They're not sure what's going on because all of a sudden it got dark. So it's all about light with most animals. Farmers have actually noticed with their cows. During an eclipse, the cows start heading towards the barn because they figure it's nighttime. It's like, I need to get into the barn at night. That's what I do. And then in the morning, then I can get out of the barn. So farmers have noticed that their farm animals, whether they're cows or pigs or whoever, those animals, as soon as the eclipse starts making it get dark, these animals, even though their biological clock is saying, no, it's not nighttime, they see the darkness and they think it's night, so they start heading for the barn. Many studies have shown that these farm animals and pets are reacting to it. But as far as wildlife goes, there hasn't been a whole lot of studies until more recently. Back in 2017 was one of the most extensive studies on wild animals. And this study was done in mostly zoos around the country. It was run by the North Carolina State University. They contacted a lot of zoos in the path of an eclipse, and they asked them to start monitoring the animals and see how they react to the eclipse, to it suddenly getting dark for a short while and then getting light again. Now, after the study was done, the results showed that about 3/4 of all animals in these zoos reacted in some way or another. Some just looked up at the sky, looked a little confused, like, what's going on here, and didn't change any other habits. Others started to head in towards where they spend the night. So they started to head into the building maybe, or they went towards the door waiting to get into the building even though it was closed. They acted as if though it was nighttime. So their biological clock got messed up and they went by the light. And because it got dark, they felt it was nighttime. Now, there was about 1/4 of the animals that didn't seem to react in any way whatsoever. So a lot of the scientists believe it depends on the species. Some species react, other species don't. Now, some other studies done outside of zoos have showed some bats coming out of their roost during an eclipse. So these bats, who are nocturnals, do all their hunting. They spend all their time awake outdoors in the dark. When it started getting dark, they figured it's nighttime, time to start hunting. And even though it was the middle of the day, they came out of the roost. They also noticed spiders. The scientists noticed spiders were taking down their webs. So they figured, well, the daytime hunting's over. I'm going to take down my web and I'll build a new one first thing in the morning. So they were taking down their web, and then all of a sudden it starts getting light again because the eclipse was over and they had to start making the web again. All of this is taking extra energy from these animals. Now, most of these studies were done with mammals, but they did find also that birds react differently as well. When it started to get dark, birds were actually starting to head for the woods heading to their nighttime roosts, and they stopped singing. They got very quiet. And they also noticed at the same time that the sounds changed. So insects started to wake up because they were more active at night. And they started hearing the cicadas and some other insects calling, but the birds went silent just during the darkness of the eclipse. So it really messed with their biological clocks during this eclipse. Now, they have studied marine mammals as well. They have done some different studies on marine mammals to see how they react. They also studied fish. They studied a lot of different animals. One astronomer, he actually wrote about how he was watching an eclipse out in the ocean from a boat, and he noticed when the eclipse came over, the whales actually came out of the water and started staring up at the sky. So it's almost like they were wondering, okay, what's going on here? What is this? They were as interested as this astronomer was with this eclipse. Another study that they did was with, and I may be pronouncing this wrong, I believe it's pronounced kitchlids, or it might be chichlids. It's a small fish from a country called Malawi, which is in East Africa. And they took these fish and they studied them during an eclipse to see how they would react, what they would do. And they did react to the nighttime, but they found a lot of fish did not. And they were wondering, well, is this because of the light, or is it because of other factors? And so they did all these studies trying to figure out, and they found out that it was the light that was affecting them because they were close enough to the surface where they were able to see the light. And they started going into their nighttime roosts, their nighttime hiding places. All of this was showing that most wild animals, are reacting to a total eclipse. And it's mostly because of the temporary nighttime. Yeah, it's putting them into their nighttime mode. Now, it's not just animals that react, they are finding. It's also plants. Plants in nature, plants in the wild, are also reacting to eclipses. They did some studies and found that during an eclipse, a plant will generate 10 to 20% less photosynthesis. Yeah, so you've got the process of photosynthesis. It's happening about 10 to 20% less during an eclipse. They also found changes in sap flow. The sap flow would actually slow down, and there's less water release from the leaves during an eclipse. With some plants, they noticed that the leaves started to droop as if though they were going into a sleep. They were going into a dormancy. So the leaves were drooping during an eclipse. Same thing that they would normally do at nighttime, but they're doing it in the middle of the day because it got dark and cooler. Now, they also noticed on a lot of different flowers that they would actually close up the buds, or the flowers would close up. So on some trees, buds were closing. On some flowers, the buds were closing. The flowers were closing. So they were reacting as if though it was nighttime. Didn't matter that they weren't open the entire day. It got dark. It got cooler. So they reacted to it. They treated it as if though it was nighttime. So all of these things are affecting both wild animals and plants. So the solar eclipse does make a difference to nature. It does affect nature. Now, some studies are trying to figure out is it a long-term effect or is it just a short-term effect? So these animals that are affected that may change their habits during the eclipse, are they going back to their normal habit right after? Well, the studies are still in progress. They're still trying to figure it out. They don't have an exact answer. Some studies are showing that many animals will have a temporary reaction. I'm not going to say long term because the studies are showing that it'll be a couple hours after the eclipse and maybe a full day where the animal will have to get back into their biological clock, their normal routine. So it does affect them a little bit long term, and we'll actually say short term. Other animals, they found that as soon as the eclipse is over, they go back to their normal lifestyle. They go back to their normal activities. So it does affect them a little bit. But if you're an owl and you just woke up because you figured it's nighttime, you're out hunting, and all of a sudden it gets bright again, you've got an animal who woke up because they saw it get bright. You might go after that animal. So they're still doing studies on this to see if this really does affect a lot of animals or if it's just temporary with most animals. So this is what science is doing to try to figure out how this affects wildlife. And you can actually help the scientists figure all this out. And you may be wondering, how on earth am I going to help? I've talked about it a dozen times before. Citizen science. Yes, even you can be a scientist. You don't have to be trained in it. You just have to know a little bit about how to collect data, hand it off to the scientists, and they use that data to help them figure things out. Once again, with citizen science, they can't be everywhere. No, the scientists are busy. There's not enough of them to be everywhere studying everything. So they do depend a lot on individuals collecting data for them, as long as it's accurate. Usually they'll have trainings to get people up to par with collecting data so that they know it's fairly accurate. There are a couple of things you can do. One program is what's called Life Responds. What they want you to do with the Life Responds, and I'll put links for all of these citizen science projects in the show notes. I'll put links to them. The Life Responds basically wants you to use iNaturalist. If you've never used iNaturalist before, it's an app you can download on your phone. They have it for both Android and Apple. Download the app on your phone, iNaturalist, and it's where you basically are submitting your nature observations. You submit them to the app, scientists use them, other backyard naturalists, as I call us, other backyard naturalists can see, what other people have been seeing in the area, what they've been spotting, and they want you to basically use, in this Life Responds program, they want you to use the data that you observe during an eclipse. Maybe you saw some owls come out. Maybe you saw a fox come out during the daytime because it got dark. Maybe you heard the birds get very quiet. All of this, they want you to submit to iNaturalist. They're going to see how animals and plants are reacting to an eclipse. Now, another one which I am participating in this year for the first time, because I just learned about it, and we're having a total solar eclipse in my area, so we don't get a lot of eclipses here. I am going to, for the first time, participate in this citizen science project. It's called Eclipse Soundscapes. Now, I'll put the link down in the show notes. And it's pretty interesting because with Eclipse Soundscapes, they've been trying to figure out how animals, birds, mammals, whoever, reacts to an eclipse, especially a total solar eclipse. And they get volunteers, citizen science, to help them out. But it's also done professionally. Scientists are out there at 17 different national parks throughout the country this year, and they're setting up very delicate scientific recording devices at the national parks to record the sounds at the park before, during, and after the eclipse, so that they can take all these recordings and analyze what's happening with the animals, how they're reacting to this eclipse. So they also want citizen scientists. They want people like you and I. If you want to spend the money on recording devices, they have them for sale, or they did have where they gave away certain number of them, these recording devices, and you can record the sound, send the data in to them on this little disc that they have, and they will take it, analyze it. But if you don't want to go through you can't get the recording devices now, not the free ones. Matter of fact, I think it's a little bit too late to get them at all from them. You had to get them pretty early. They sold out like December of 2023. So they do want other people without recording, just submitting their observations. So you can do training. They have a website. It's going to be in the show notes. They have a website where you can actually learn how to collect the data, what they're looking for, how to collect it, and how to submit it to them. Essentially, what you're going to do, I already took the training, so I know, is you're going to be sitting there and observing before, during, and after the eclipse. Observe the sounds around you. The wildlife sounds. Are you hearing birds? Did they go silent? Are you hearing insects? Did they go silent? Did they start getting louder during the eclipse? What's going on? What about frogs? What about other sounds of nature? What is happening during the eclipse to these animals? And you record it and you submit it to them. Now, it's really easy to do the eclipse soundscapes. What you need to do first is go to their website, do the free online observer training. Okay, there's different levels. You would be an observer, and you do the observer training. Then you observe and take field notes during the eclipse. They want at least 10 minutes before, then during, and then at least 10 minutes after the eclipse maximum. You also need to submit your latitude and longitude, and you can do that online. They give you all the information on their website on how to find that information, and you submit where you work. I'm going to be sitting out in my front yard with my wife, and I believe my daughter and son-in-law and their kids are coming over too. And we're just going to sit here and watch the eclipse and enjoy it. And we're going to observe too. Observe what sounds we're hearing. Observe what's going on with nature. Because things will change. It's getting dark. It's also getting cooler. Remember, the sun goes down. It's just like day and night. During the day, you get warmer temperatures. At nighttime, you get cooler temperatures. And that happens during an eclipse as well. So all of these things are affecting nature, and they're still trying to figure out how much it affects nature or what species it affects. So help them out, help the scientists out with these different citizen science projects like Life Responds or the Eclipse Soundscapes project. And before I close, before I end today, I do want to remind you, if you are in the line of totality, in other words, the path of the eclipse, and you are planning on viewing the eclipse, please do it safely. If you are out driving, don't drive down the road and pull over to the side to watch it. Drive and pull off to a safe location. Get there early if you're going somewhere to watch it. I told my kids, get here early. You don't want to deal with the traffic. They're expecting millions of people to mob Western New York to watch this. So get to your place early. Do things safely. I saw a message. I nearly died, but the announcer on the news, the newscaster, she actually said, we really shouldn't have to say this, but Hey, we do. Please don't drive with your viewing glasses on. Yeah, they did say that on the news. The New York State Department of Transportation is warning people, please don't drive with your viewing glasses on. And I do want to mention, if you don't have viewing glasses, please do not stare directly at the eclipse. When it's in totality, that is the only safe time to view it without the special glasses. And don't just grab any sunglasses. They're not going to help protect your eyes. There are special viewing glasses. I have my pair. I have a pair for my wife, and I got a couple of extras in case I get friends showing up. So I do have special viewing glasses. Please, please, please watch this event, but watch it safely. I hope you enjoyed learning about how wildlife is affected by an eclipse, especially a total solar eclipse. If you enjoyed wandering through nature with me today, please don't forget to invite a friend along the next time. The more the merrier. If you like what you heard and you haven't already done so, please hit the subscribe button. Take a minute to rate and review the podcast. If you have any nature questions or ideas for future episodes, feel free to drop me a DM on my Instagram page at @TheNatureWanderer, underscores in between each of the words, or my website at thenaturewanderer.com. You can also support the podcast by joining my Ko-Fi page. The links are in the show notes for all of these things. If you'd like to journal all your wanderings, maybe you'd like to journal about watching the eclipse and what you noticed. Well, I do have nature journals available. The link is on my website and also in the show notes. They're great for writing down your observations in nature. I also have some journals for the youngsters or the young ones at heart too, which are more of a guided journal. And I also want to remind you, keep exploring the nature around you. Have a great week. Did you know that plastic is made with oil, a fossil fuel that pollutes the environment? And did you know that only about 15% of all plastic is recycled into new products? Wouldn't it be awesome if we could live our lives without plastic so that we could stop harming the planet? Well, there's a company that wants to help you do just that. Life Without Plastic sells products that will reduce or eliminate your dependence on plastic. They have a large selection from toothbrushes to food storage containers to drinking straws, all plastic free. And it's reasonably priced. So what are you waiting for? Check out all these great plastic-free products and help save the planet. Just click on the link in the show notes to find out more and to start your journey to being plastic-free.